bastion that was, surrounded. I told you guys about yesterday with the General McCullough down there, right? Battle of the bastion. I believe so. Nuts. All right. So Patton, considered one of the greatest U.S. generals in World War II, his reckless, outspoken manner gained him friends and enemies of equal determination. He led troops in Morocco, Tunisia, Sicily, then took command of the Third Army, leading troops through German lines at Normandy to conquer France. His toughness on his enemies, as well as his own forces, earned him the nickname Old Blood and Guts. Okay, so here's our good friend Pat. Okay, so guys, a month later, so the Battle of the Bulge ends in January. A month later, there's going to be a meeting of the Big Three. The Big Three being the United States, Great Britain, and the Soviet Union. I know when you were kids, many of you guys watched Sesame Street. Which one of these is not like the other? The communist military dictator, one. Yes? Okay, now, Yalta is on the Black Sea. Okay? Stalin claims a fear of flying. So if you want to meet with Stalin, you got to come to him. The Black Sea can be found here along the eastern coast of that body of water is Yalta. Okay? So because Stalin is hosting the conference, he chooses the location. He chooses to put Churchill and Roosevelt at opposite ends of the resort, making it a little bit more difficult for those two to get together and conspire against the communist country. Now, what's kind of interesting about this, guys, I've done a lot of reading on it, and Churchill badly wanted to meet with Roosevelt before they went out to Russia to meet with Stalin. Churchill thought it would be good if the two democratic nations could build a strong kind of, plan or agenda and kind of be willing to stand up to Stalin if he demanded too much at this conference. Roosevelt chose not to meet with Churchill. Now, historians can only guess at why Roosevelt would not meet with Churchill. One reason you might think is that Roosevelt was just tired of Churchill. Churchill's been bugging him since 1940. Get in the war. We need help. Send ships. Send supplies. We need help. Get in the war. Daily. Okay? And so maybe he just didn't want to spend time with Churchill. Or maybe he didn't want to give Stalin the appearance that, they were ganging up on him, that we were equal partners in this alliance, and that by not meeting with Churchill, they could give that impression. I will have another theory a bit later on in the notes. Okay? All right. So, what are they discussing here? Obviously, they're sitting. Why are they sitting? Because of Roosevelt. Now, these two old guys are going to have to travel halfway around the globe to meet with Stalin. Now, Roosevelt is not in good health. This is a tough, travel conditions are not like what they are today. You know what I mean? He doesn't have Air Force One and, that sort of thing. So it's not an easy trip to make. And Churchill's no spring chicken. All right? So, but what they're here discussing is how they're going to finish the war. Okay? And what Europe is going to look like after the war. And so what they do decide on here, a couple different things, and I got a bunch more on the next slide, is an unconditional surrender of all of our enemies. Now, what that means, unconditional surrender, guys, means we are going to invade your country. Any leaders that were in power are now out of power. They will be put on trial and so forth. And we will govern your country until we see it fit for you to govern your own country. And this is indeed what we do with both Germany and Japan. Now, by doing this, Will this make the war last longer than, say, a peace treaty? Yeah, it will. Will it make the opponent fight longer and harder? Will more Americans and Allied soldiers die because of this? Absolutely. But I think history, looking back on it, shows us this was indeed the right choice. Now, that's hard to say to, somebody that lost a family member in the last, month or two of the war. But at the same time, we can look back at a prosperous Europe, a prosperous Japan, that are both good allies of the United States today. Okay. Now, so Stalin wants large reparations. Russia has been devastated. Now, have we learned our lesson, World War I, about these reparations and what that led to? Okay. So in actuality, we will. The Russians won't, but we will. Okay. And the British will. Okay. So this next slide really makes for a good long answer question on a test. Okay. Now, Stalin is a tough bargainer here, okay? And you can see from this political cartoon, you've got Stalin reaching for Europe, reaching for China, reaching for India. You got Churchill here and Uncle Sam over here, all right? This little thing is the cartoonist's signature, so it's not part of the cartoon. All right. Now, Stalin wanted Poland to have a communist government after the war. Now, Roosevelt and Churchill say no. Can anybody tell me, did Poland have a communist government after the war? Yeah, for the next 40 years. Listen, guys, as the Red Army rolls into Eastern Europe, it will not leave for 40 years. So what's at stake here is massive. Tens of millions of people, hundreds of millions of people, and their lives, their destinies are all tied to this meeting, to these decisions. Stalin wanted half of the reparations. Russia had been devastated, no doubt. Some of that devastation was caused by their own scorched earth, yes, and the policies of their dictator. Now, they will get those reparations. They will take them from what becomes known as East Germany. Now, they promised to declare war, Stalin does, on Japan after the defeat of Germany. In fact, he gives a date. He says 3 months after victory over Germany, we will declare war on Japan. VE Day is May 8th, 1945. 3 months later is August 8th, 1945. The timing here is very important. Okay? Does anybody know what happens on August 6th, 1945? Yeah. The first atomic bomb. Okay? The second atomic bomb is on the 9th. Japan will not surrender for close to 2 weeks after the second bomb. This is going to give Stalin time to get his troops into places like, I don't know, North Korea, which is still communist today. So the timing here is very interesting. Now, this is February. So you guys familiar with the Manhattan Project? This is the secret, top secret project to build the atomic bomb in the United States. Okay? Now, by February of 45, Roosevelt does not have any indication that this is actually going to work yet. We don't detonate the first atomic bomb until July. This is February. So we don't have the, quote, winning weapon yet. Okay, so when you look at this, we still feel like we're going to need the Russians to help win this war. Now, we have a pretty good indication that we're going to win in Europe. We're going to defeat Germany. But the Japanese question is still out there. There's a lot of work to be done in the Pacific. Stalin promises to join the United Nations when it's established. Then we'll demand 2 seats because of how big Russia is on the UN Security Council. We will allow him to take some Japanese islands and Outer Mongolia. Don't know where Outer Mongolia is. This big purple blob right here. Okay. So we tell him, yeah, you can have that. Okay. There's nothing out there anyways. There's really not much out there. Yeah. Right. Oh yeah. I mean, it's actually it's kind of a cool place. George W. Bush was the first president of the United States to ever visit there. In the 2000s, he went to Mongolia. Okay. You guys might know more about Mongolia than I do.
Don't they open up like this, bro?
Yeah. Good culture.
Sure. I agree. So here's the big lie, okay? This is the big lie. Promising not to interfere in Eastern Europe. Okay. So what's at stake? I don't know. Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, Czechoslovakia, Hungary, Yugoslavia, Germany, Poland. That's what's at stake here. Okay. Now, Roosevelt and Churchill take Stalin at his word. Obviously, this turns out to be a mistake. They did feel like they didn't have a choice. Let me read this to you since you can't see it very well. We felt we needed Soviet armies to defeat Germany and Japan to finish them off. And then for the next 40 years, the world will pay a price for Stalin's lies. That's what that says at the bottom. So we need his armies to defeat Germany and Japan. 40 years, the world pays a price for Stalin's lies.
Do you think that if they hadn't stood up to Stalin, that it would have turned out worse or better?
If there's one thing we learn about the Russians in the 20th century, and that we should pay attention to right now, is that the Russians really only respect one thing. You know what that is? Power, strength. Okay. So it's hard to, predict what would have happened. But I can tell you this. After the defeat of Germany, Patton made a speech while in Germany, in which he said, give me 5 million gallons of gasoline, and I will take care of the communist bastards right now. About 2 weeks later, Patton died in a suspicious automobile accident. Any guys that read Killing Patton? You read that for your project?
No,
or you read the book?
I read the book.
Yeah, some suspicious there. Yeah?
Yeah.
I don't know, but there were some links between the OSS and the Soviets, of which I'm about to discuss, actually. Okay, so when you guys were juniors, you read a book, hopefully, called The Crucible. Grace?
I don't think so. I especially did not read that one. I did read it. I did not understand it.
Our teacher we did not have a good teacher last year.
Oh, she was nice. I don't remember.
This is about the Salem witch trial?
Yeah.
I remember what it's about. I just.
Yeah. Yeah. And what your English teacher would typically do is talk about Salem witch trials and then talk about this, McCarthyism. That happened for some of you?
Yes.
Okay.
That's how.
Okay. So listen, let's talk about this, all right? Because, guys, when the Soviet Union collapses in 1990, they do open up some of their archives, which is going to allow us to kind of put two and two together. Okay, now, Claire Jordan did her NHD on McCarthyism. Anybody else do something like that? Okay, so McCarthyism, let's just read through this, okay? Is the practice of making accusations of disloyalty, subversion, or treason without proper regard for evidence. It also means the practice of making unfair allegations or for using unfair investigative techniques, especially in order to restrict dissent or political criticism. The term has its origins in the period in the United States known as the Second Red Scare, lasting roughly from 1950 to 1956. Okay, so the dates are important here because we're in 1944, 45. We're in 45 talking about, okay? And characterized by heightened fears of communist influence on American institutions and espionage by Soviet agents. Originally coined to criticize the anti-communist pursuits of Republican U.S. Senator Joseph McCarthy of Wisconsin, McCarthyism soon took on broader meaning, describing the excesses of similar efforts. The term is now also more used generally to describe reckless, unsubstantiated accusations, as well as demagogic attacks on the character and patriotism of political adversaries. Now, when the Clinton campaign paid for fake Russian information and then got the FBI to look at that, and then went to the private Fisa Courts to spy on the Trump campaign to say that their campaign was colluding with the Russians to win the election. What is that? Because a lot of that stuff is coming out now as all false. It was all made up. Yeah. Okay, so, well, you got it. I mean, you have to track with this over time. Okay. But I can start with this. When Hillary was running for president against Trump in 2016, Hillary had a private server. She was the Secretary of State. Every device that you use as Secretary of State to do official business is public record because we pay her. She works for us. She had a private server in her basement. So this news story broke. And so the Clinton campaign decided, well, let's just change the tune. Let's drum up something about Trump. So they paid some people to establish a fake dossier. So they got a former British MI6 guy to meet with a Russian. They cooked up all this fake stuff about Trump, leaked it to the media. So the media is talking about it. Now it must be legitimate. So then they go to the FBI. The FBI says, oh, this is interesting. And so they go to the courts, this is after 9/11. They have these private courts called Fisa Courts that allow you to, basically circumvent the Fourth Amendment and spy on people. And so Trump during the campaign said, the FBI is spying on me. People laughed at him. Okay, they were. So they made these connections with some of the people that worked for Trump in this fake dossier. Okay. And they took that to the court, knowing that, they might have even known the Clinton campaign was paying for this information, okay? And they didn't tell the court that. So the court allowed warrants on Trump people on the campaign. And so they were listening in the conversations. This is all done on false pretenses. And then they say Trump is colluding with the Russians in his campaign to win. And then when he won, then they, so President Trump was always under investigation, even before he took office, for the first 2 years, okay? And it was all done on false pretenses. Now, this stuff's coming out now because there's a special counsel named Robert Durham that is investigating this. Thus far, he has indicted the Russian guy that helped him, one of the lawyers that didn't work for the Clinton campaign but was paid for by the Clinton campaign, and one other person that they've indicted so far. That means they've brought charges against him. Okay, so we'll see how far this goes up the chain, but you can trace it back to the Clinton campaign and the Democratic National Committee that paid for this stuff. Okay, but Washington Post deserves some credit because they came out last week and said our reporting on this was way off base. It was wrong. Okay, they've called on CNN to do the same thing. They haven't at this point, but more and more is going to continue to come out about this. Okay, the whole thing was cooked up. What? Making accusations of disloyalty, subversion, or treason without proper regard for evidence. Okay, now you'll never hear the media call what happened to Trump Mccarthyism. Okay, you'll never hear that. Okay, now let's continue. Okay, now this is the 1950s. What we're talking about here. Oh, by the way, Joseph McCarthy was a tail gunner on a B-17 bomber during the war, and like Bob Dole and Daniel Inouye, said, you know what, when I get out of the war, I'm going to run for Congress. McCarthy was one of the most popular men in America, and then he went. Okay, now what he did do is he made unfair allegations, unsubstantiated allegations. He did that. I mean, that's true. But one thing, you can look this up. McCarthy never called out an individual by name and said, you are communists. He never did that. Now, did he say there were hundreds of people working in the State Department that were communist spies? Yes. Did he have proof? No. Okay. Did this lead to some ugly stuff like blacklisting of Hollywood actors and directors that had ties to communism? Guys, it is not illegal in this country to be a communist. It's not illegal to be a fascist, a Nazi, a KKK member, a Black Panther. You can be whatever you want in this country. Okay? So being a communist is not against the law. Okay? But maybe you don't want them working in the upper echelons of government, spying for an enemy of the United States that has nuclear weapons. By the way, speaking of the atomic bomb and atomic weapons, it only took the Russians 2 years after we built our first atomic bomb, which took many years to build. How did it only take the Russians that short period of time to build their first atomic bomb? Oh, they had spies at the Manhattan Project. Not one, but two. Now, when the war was over and the Russians opened up their archives, they also declassified something called the Winona Project. Okay, this is not in your history book. Okay? We now understand that communist infiltration of the U.S. government during the 30s and 40s, okay? McCarthy is 50 to 56, okay? Let's be full disclosure here, was real and damaging. The opening of some Soviet archives and the release of the Winona Project files. These are intercepted wartime and post-war messages between Moscow and communist agents in the United States. Now understand this, guys. Communist agents, communist spies working for Russia are mostly Americans. These are Americans that have chosen to work with Russia, not like they snuck Russian people into the country. Now, there is some of that, okay? But it's more often than not, these are Americans that are doing it, okay? Confirmed much of what Whitaker Chambers, this man, Elizabeth Bentley, and other ex-communists told the House Un-American Activities Committee and other congressional committees. Now, this is Whittaker Chambers' book, okay, called Witness. He is a confessed Soviet spy, and he sang like a bird to get his prison sentence reduced. So he told him everything he knew. Okay, you follow me? And one of the people that Whittaker Chambers called out as a communist spy is this man. This is Alger Hiss. Alger Hiss was advising, he worked for the State Department, he was advising Roosevelt at Yalta. So you had a Russian paid spy in the ear of the President of the United States on Russian soil, determining the fate of Eastern Europe. Maybe that's why Roosevelt wouldn't meet with Churchill before they went out to Yalta, because he was being advised not to. You guys tracking this? So, if you take the Winona files and the Soviet archives, 3 recent books on the subject, The Haunted Wood, Winona Decoding Soviet Espionage in America, and The Winona Secrets, provide evidence that American communists successfully infiltrated the State Department, Alger Hiss, Treasury Department, the Office of Strategic Services, the OSS, which is the precursor to the CIA, okay? The Justice Department, the Agriculture Department, Commerce Department, the Office of War Information, the War Production Board, the Board of Economic Warfare, the Civil Service Commission, the AAA, the Army, the Navy, Congress, the Manhattan Project, the United Nations, and the White House. There were Soviet spies in all of these organizations. The highest ranking Soviet agents, including Harry Dexter White, who was the #2 man at the Treasury, key State Department official Alger Hiss, Duncan Lee, chief assistant to the director of the OSS. This would be like having an ISIS person working as the assistant director of the CIA. It's freaking nuts, okay? Now, Congressman Samuel Dickstein, Lucy Lynn Curie, who is a special assistant to the president. The authors of the Winona Secrets go so far to identify Harry Hopkins, who we all know about as one of the most trusted advisors, as a Soviet agent. If that is true, then the Soviet Union had in place an agent of influence who had the ear of President Roosevelt on every significant issue and policy. Now, you guys have all heard of Eisenhower, right? He would be president from 1952 to 1960. He was one of the most moderate presidents we had in American history. I mean, they didn't know whether he was a Republican or a Democrat. Eisenhower said this about McCarthy. He said, "Thank God somebody is doing it," pointing out that these Soviet agents have infiltrated our government. That was in the late 40s. Okay, and so McCarthy did that. They started, this House Un-American Activities Committee started questioning people's loyalty, and it got ugly. You know what I mean? And then the American people just rejected it. Okay, and that's where McCarthy gets his downfall, and he gets his own ism named after him. Very few people on this planet have ever gotten an ism named after themselves. They're a pretty notorious group. Marxism, Calvinism. Got any more isms? Darwinism, Buddhism. Are you making stuff up now? What? What'd you say, Lutheranism? Yeah. Yeah, it's a pretty small select group. Okay? So, guys, listen. Am I saying, I guess what I'm trying to tell you is that, guys, there were Soviet agents in our government at the higher up echelons of our government. Okay? And that probably wasn't a good idea. Okay? Now, what about today? Who's spying on us? Yeah.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Were there any, like, did we infiltrate the Soviet Union at all and have any?
Oh, do we have
Oh,
spies? Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, a lot. too.
Yeah, we definitely try. Now we're a really diverse society, right? So, I mean, like if you look today, do you know who spies on the United States today? Thank you. Yes, our own government. Yeah, the Chinese certainly. Yes, and I don't know if you've heard about this, but like there was a professor at KU that was indicted last year that did not disclose that he was taking money from the Communist Party of China. That he broke the law. Okay, he's teaching in the United States and he's taking money from the Communist Chinese government. Yes. Oh, well, information.
I mean, you would be surprised at how any little tiny thing can be useful.
Well, yeah. So listen. Now, I'm not trying to create some type of xenophobic fear of Chinese people in this country. For heaven's sake, my daughter's from China. And so is Grace. Okay? So we don't want to do that. Okay? I'm not trying to do that. But listen, people. The Chinese are up to it big time. Now, there's many different ways to do that. And the best way, easiest way, is to send them into our universities. They go to get engineering degrees, aerospace engineering. Oh, let me see if I can go work for Lockheed Martin. And then I can learn how this highly sensitive technology works. You know, like multiple delivery nuclear warhead systems, that sort of thing. And then I can report back to the Chinese government. Yeah.
So then why would that guy become a professor?
So, well, no, it's just about any type of information about how maybe an educational program would work. Now, this could be an American professor or it could be a Chinese professor. You know what I mean? It could be both. But what you're finding, guys, there are people in this country in academia that are favorable toward the idea of communism. You understand that, right? Academia is made up mostly by left-wing people. No, I'm not calling them out. Okay? I'm just saying, but people that think that way are susceptible to supporting those ideas. Okay, so that's what they go after. Okay, now, as far as getting students in here and so forth, that's an easy way to do it. The other country that really spies on us more than any other country is Israel. And they're our ally. Okay, Israel spies on us because they want to know. Like, does Joe Biden have their back? They need to know that. You know what I mean? So they're spying, not nefariously. They just for information. Yeah.
So what would you say about the U.S., like, in other countries?
You know, we don't know a lot of that. Because hopefully they don't get caught. But have they been caught over the years? Absolutely.
Right, but
Yeah.
like most of them.
There is a video about like a former CIA director talking about all the operations that she ran against the Soviet Union. Have you ever seen those?
No.
But they're out there. I think they're through Wired or something.
Okay.
On YouTube.
Pretty good.
They're pretty good.
Really interesting.
Really
Yeah.
interesting. Like,
Yeah. Yeah, we both doing it, okay? But guys, listen, I don't know. You guys, we've talked about the Uyghur population in here before. Okay, President Biden and President Xi had a 3-hour conference last night, a telephone conference. Okay, now the way the Chinese media portrayed that conference is, I mean, they show this very stern, President Xi, and kind of almost Biden is kind of a cartoonish character at points. And so they're really portraying this as Xi dominating the conversation, as Xi dominating, warning Biden about Taiwan. And, guys, the Chinese have hired lobbyists, some of the most powerful people in this country, hired as lobbyists to lobby for policies that are pro-China. Okay, people like John Kerry. These people do not have your best interest at heart. They're worried about money. Can you speak to this, Abe? Whatever. Lobbying. Chinese lobbying. Okay. Ask your dad.
I mean, lobbyists are really like influential. So.
Yeah. Guys, okay. We're studying history, right? We're studying genocide. I know I haven't talked a lot about the Holocaust yet, okay? But guys, it's happening right now on this planet, and nobody cares. The media doesn't care. There's one guy in the NBA people in here. That one dude from Turkey, he's like standing up, okay? LeBron James doesn't want to talk about Chinese imprisonment, genocide, concentration camps of Muslim Chinese people, okay? He don't want to talk about that because then he won't get the big money from China. Joe Biden doesn't want to talk about it. Hunter Biden doesn't want to talk about it. And many Republicans don't want to talk about it because there's too much money. We're so intertwined with an evil called the Communist Party of China. And I'm not afraid to say it. YouTube, take me down. I don't care. Listen, when did we stop standing up for justice as a nation, as a world? Why is the United Nations not doing something, punishing China economically for concentration camps? Does anybody have an answer? It's money. Yeah, it's disgusting. Okay? Guys, we can do this as a nation. We can do this on our own with our partners. We don't need China. Now, we are very intertwined with them, and it's dangerous to be. You guys know, we talk about supply chain issues. The batteries that go into these automobiles and these cars, all the supply chain for that stuff comes through what? China. And if they want to cut that off, we're relying on them for our subsistence. That's dangerous. I mean, they actually had to fight to make sure that no aircraft parts for our military were made in China. Duh. Why would we make airplane parts in China? When we got in a war with them, they could cut off our supply chain to our own military might. We had to, there was an argument over that. Why is there even an argument over that? Yeah.
Are we even allies with China?
We are economic partners with China. We are not allies.
That's right now.
It is. It is. And guys, what happens if they try and take back Taiwan? I mean, I don't think Biden would lift a freaking finger. So nothing.
Is the standoff in the South China Sea?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. It's tense.
Like
And then if you look at what Russia's doing right now with Belarus,
the Germans are still there.
the Russians are like, in the Ukraine and Belarus. You got to read up on this stuff. NATO is like concerned. There's a bunch of Russian troops at the border with Belarus as we speak.
Or they wanted to invade it.
All right, guys, I got 5 minutes. Sorry. All right. Those guys that got off those landing craft in Normandy, off the ships, their goal was to take Berlin. The war would be over if we took Berlin. But we're not going to take Berlin. The Soviets are going to take Berlin. The First Army crosses the Rhine River on March 7th. Now, the Rhine is, the biggest river in Central Europe. That's kind of, one of the places where the Germans could have put up a fight. And so we crossed the Rhine. German defenses are crumbling. So Eisenhower has to make a decision. Now, that decision is going to be based on what Roosevelt tells him to do. But we could press forward, just put Patton in charge, press forward, take Berlin, hurry up, get to Prague. You remember, Czechoslovakia was the only democratic nation in Eastern Europe before the war, so that we could save the Czechs, and this would hold Stalin to his promises. Or we could mop up German forces behind our own lines, let the Soviets take Berlin and Prague, which would make it easier for Stalin to impose communism on Poland, Czechoslovakia, Hungary, Romania, Bulgaria, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, and Yugoslavia. Churchill, always a shrewd judge of character, saw this coming. Just like he saw Hitler coming, he knew that Stalin was not a good actor. He warns Eisenhower, he warns Roosevelt. They wanted to avoid U.S. casualties. So the United States will stop 50 miles west of Berlin and let the Soviets take it. Now, the Soviets are going to lose more lives because of this. Oh, and the people of Berlin will as well. Hitler would not let civilians leave the city. By this time, German army consists of the young and the old. And we are talking about 13-year-olds, 14-year-olds fighting in the streets of Berlin against the Russians, and old men. Little play on words here. Eastern Europe will go from Nazi tyranny to communist tyranny. 40 years. We will stop at the Elbe River. I'll show you where that is real quick. Okay, so here's the Rhine. Work our way across. This is the Elbe. Russians will come in. Okay. Tomorrow I'll talk about Dresden as well. But before I move on from that, guys, the Russians, as they go into Berlin, are extremely brutal on the population there. As I said, Hitler wouldn't let the civilians leave. So the civilians were there when the Soviets got there. They were very undisciplined. They were allowed to steal, loot, and rape. If you were a German woman in Berlin when the Soviets came in, there was a very good chance you were raped. If not once, multiple times. It's very well documented. The Soviet troops behaved very badly. Awful. Our troops don't act like that. We don't do that. Okay? Now, in every big organization, you're going to have some bad apples. But the whole frickin' Russian army was rotten. It was bad. You can look it up. Not making it up. Okay? So, tomorrow we move further. We'll turn our focus to the Pacific tomorrow. Okay? And hopefully wrap this thing up. Yeah.
Thursday or
Friday. If there's anything I need to wrap up on Thursday, I'll have review sheets for you if you haven't printed one off. Again, I just say, start reading through the notes, you'll do fine. Okay. Bye, guys. Sorry I got so